This evening, we are incredibly honored to bring back Melanie Phillips. Melanie lives both in London and Jerusalem. Her story is remarkable. As far as I'm concerned, she is a brilliant journalist. The one thing very special about her journalistic skills is that she's honest about what she writes. And usually that means she'll piss off a lot more people than the people who are dishonest, who try to please people. I cannot say enough about what she has accomplished and the number of people who are after her because of her accomplishments. She's going to talk with us about what's going on, not only in the UK, but also what's going on in Israel. Her topic is the world on the brink. She is also a broadcaster and an author who's championed traditional values in the culture war for more than 3 decades. And she's an extremely sought-after speaker. Would you join me, please, in welcoming Melanie Phillips?
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. Good evening, everybody. It really is a very great pleasure indeed to be back here in Aspen. It's such a beautiful place and such an oasis of tranquility compared to both Jerusalem, where I mainly live, and London, where I also live, in a strange pattern of a mind divided between two worlds. I'm here this evening to talk to you about what I think is the question on all of our minds, which is basically, has everyone else simply lost their mind? How on earth can we make sense of what we've been living through these past 10 months? How is it going to develop? What on earth is going to happen next? We can hardly leave my phone for 10 minutes before some other dreadful event has developed. And what does it all mean for us as Jews, both in the diaspora and in Israel? Well, as you know, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you, war is raging in Israel, against Israel, and we are on tenterhooks at this very moment about whether Iran is about to unleash, whether Hezbollah is about to unleash. We don't know. But what we do know is that the war against Israel is being fought in what I would call a looking glass world. This war is being waged by Iran through its proxies to, in its own words, wipe Israel off the map. Yet, the Biden administration here insists that the way to stop this war against Israel to wipe it off the map is through the establishment of a state for the Palestinians. Hamas has said it will perpetrate the October the 7th style attacks again and again until Israel is finally destroyed. The response of the Biden administration, of the British government, of the United Nations, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, is to pressure Israel to an immediate ceasefire, which would mean victory for Hamas. America says, however, its support for Israel's defense is ironclad. The British government says it supports entirely Israel's right to self-defense. This ironclad support for Israel by both America and Britain apparently does not mean Israel defeating its genocidal enemies. Iran is waging this war through a 7-front ring of fire, trapping Israel inside it. Immediately after the October 7th pogrom, the Biden administration told Israel that it must not preemptively attack the Hezbollah, which has something like 150,000 missiles and rockets pointing at Israel, The Biden administration said you must not preemptively attack the Hezbollah, which Israel was intending to do, because that would mean a dangerous escalation. The result has been 10 months of rocket and missile bombardments against Israel every day, with swathes of northern Israel burned to the ground, the displacement from their homes of tens of thousands of Israelis who cannot go back, and only last month the Hezbollah sent a missile over which massacred 12 Druze children playing soccer in Majd al-Shams. But apparently, to the Biden administration, to the British government, to the United Nations, this is not escalation. Escalation is only when Israel responds. That is escalation. Is this crazy or what? When Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader who was responsible for the slaughter of untold thousands of Jews and was partly responsible as part of the Hamas leadership for the October 7 pogrom, when Israel assassinated him in this extraordinary operation in Tehran, Mr. Biden was apparently absolutely furious and tore Netanyahu off a strip, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because of course that assassination of Haniyeh was escalation. Now Israel is being told, with everybody waiting in Israel for the attack from Iran, with everybody equipping their homes with water to last for 3 days, canned food, dried food, stocks of candles, is the shelter ready? Everyone living on their nerves. Israel is being told, if Iran attacks you, says the Biden administration, don't push it in your response. Don't push it. This is effectively an invitation to Iran to attack an open goal. It would appear that Israel's ironclad allies expect it to wait until missiles start raining down on Tel Aviv, Haifa or Jerusalem before it responds at all. And then if it responds, not too much. Militarily, this is absolutely imbecilic. In military terms, it's essential that Israel strikes preemptively, not just to prevent the Iranian escalation, but to enable Israel to defeat Iran. So how on earth are we to interpret these very confused signals from America, this enormous show of strength in the defense of Israel, which is being assembled with these warships being assembled, this fleet of warships and other measures in order to defend Israel by the Biden administration, this enormous show of strength to come to Israel's defense, and yet its refusal to allow Israel to attack Iran and thus defeat its mortal enemy. How are we to explain this very confusing talking out of both sides of your mouth at the same time? Now, of course, many people can and do point to political agendas in the Biden administration or anti-Jewish prejudice by members of that administration. And we can just discuss that, and there is a lot of truth, I think, in some of those points. But I would suggest that in order to fully understand this very strange conundrum we're facing, we need to broaden our focus to a looking-glass world that is much wider and much deeper. Let's look for a start at the reaction in the Western world to the October 7 pogrom. One might have thought that there would be sympathy and understanding following what was the single biggest and most barbaric atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, perpetrated by Islamists who channel genocidal, what I would call Islamo-Nazism, and we would have expected people to be horrified in the West and to express sympathy and support for Israel. Not a bit of it. Sympathy and support lasted a few hours. What then happened was the arrival of an absolute tsunami of open, brazen, often murderous anti-Semitism throughout the West. It was as if a signal had been given. Enormous demonstrations, which we've all seen taking place on the streets, still going on in Britain. Perhaps they're still going on here in the streets, with calls for the destruction of Israel by the demonstrators, calls for the murder of Jews, going on all the time. We saw on campus the widespread intimidation of Jewish students still going on. In Britain, we've had white-skinned demonstrators screaming in the last few days, "We hate Zionists, we hate Zionists," as a chant. Hello? Why do they hate Zionists? Do they know any Zionists? Have they ever met any Zionists? Do they even know what the term means? We hate Zionists. In Belgium, a writer in a Flemish magazine has written, I think in the last week, he wants to, quote, ram a knife down every Jew's throat. Why? What have the Jews ever done to him? I would suggest absolutely nothing. In Britain, and perhaps here too, doctors, teachers, lawyers, charities, actors, film directors, novelists, politicians, and of course the media are all recycling blood libels against Israel with patently ludicrous accusations of genocide and war crimes. Most bizarre of all was this phenomenon that we all saw soon after October 7th, where posters of the hostages were put up, and they were torn down. They were torn down week after week. They were put up, they were torn down. They were put back up, they were torn down. And we saw faces of the people who were tearing them down, convulsed with hatred and rage, tearing them down. Now, what kind of pathological mental disorder lies behind the frenzied tearing down of pictures of innocent people, including children and babies, who have been kidnapped by murderers and torturers? Is this not absolutely bizarre? No other country or people is ever treated like this. This is a level of hysteria, of obsessional hatred, that is applied to no other country or cause in the world, however terrible they truly are. Nobody is holding demonstrations and calling for the destruction of Syria, Russia, North Korea, on the grounds of their all too real crimes against humanity. No one even thinks about that. What is so uniquely terrible about Israel? Now, we've all focused on the reaction to October 7, which is, as I've said, bizarre. We've seen the mass demonstrations calling for jihad, calling for globalize the Intifada. We've seen the eruption on campus. We've now seen the very well-known cases of university principals unable or unwilling to attack anti-Jewish incitement and Jew hatred. We've seen all that. We've discussed it. We say, how can we explain this? And we say, well, it's anti-Semitism. Well, I think this is to miss an important point. The point that really we have to bear in mind is that these demonstrations started in London on October 7th. The pogrom hadn't finished. The Israelis not only had not yet attacked Gaza, they hadn't finished trying to prevent Israelis from being murdered in southern Israel. It was still going on. And the first demonstration started in London, outside, I think it was outside the Israel embassy. And the point was, it was a Muslim demonstration, and they were ecstatic. It was a demonstration of ecstasy. And I think this is a very important point, because although a lot of non-Muslims have been joining in these demonstrations, and the anti-Semitism and all the rest of it, the demonstrations and the whole anti-Israel movement that started on October 7th has been really led by not just Muslims, but by Hamas supporting Muslims in the West. And I think it's because what happened on October 7th was, as I've said, a kind of starting gun. They believed that a starting gun had been fired for their apocalyptic war to destroy the West. They understood, we've broken the Israeli defense. They are no longer impervious to us. They are no longer secure against us. We've murdered them. We've taken them hostage. They never thought we would do that. Nobody thought we would do that. We didn't think we would do that. We've done it. This is a fantastic victory. We're on our way. We're on our way now to destroy Israel. We're on our way now to destroy the Jewish people. And behind the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people lies the West. The West is now open for us. And so out they poured and have continued to pour, because this is what is being incited all the time. We are on a roll. This is our moment. Now, this is not spontaneous. These demonstrations were not spontaneous. They were organized. We know for a fact there are Hamas operatives in Britain, elsewhere, who were helping organize these demonstrations in concert with anti-Israel groups. We know that the Muslim Brotherhood, the organization of Islamists whose aim is to control or take over, attack and eventually take over the West, we know that they were behind it. We know that the Iranians were behind it, were behind these protests, these demonstrations. And we know that the Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Iran, which are different wings of the Islamic world. Hamas is Sunni, Iran is Shia, but we know that Hamas and Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood have operatives and cells in place across Europe and in America. So these people were all in place to organize these amazing demonstrations, this amazing movement on the back of the October 7th pogrom. But at the same time, something closely related has been taking place for a number of years in Britain and in Europe, and to a certain extent in America. And this is the massive and growing Muslim minorities in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Sweden, and in Britain, of whom a large proportion refuse to assimilate or fit in, who intimidate or attack the host population, and who demand that host societies adapt instead to Islamic precepts. Now, in Britain, it's important to remember, important to acknowledge, that probably the majority of British Muslims are not like that at all. They simply want, just like you and me, have a job, raise a family, live quietly, enjoy the human rights of the West. However, there is a very large proportion who do not want to adhere to that. And what we've seen very recently in Britain, which has horrified very large numbers of people who didn't see this coming. We've seen in recent months, in recent weeks, the rise of a political Muslim bloc, a Muslim political bloc, and the arrival of sectarian Muslim ethnic politics. Before the general election that was held last month, a Muslim political caucus emerged, making a list of demands as the price for support from the Muslim community, and those demands included a variety of measures to turn Israel into a pariah state, and a variety of measures to adapt British society to a number of Islamic precepts. At the election itself, 5 candidates were elected as independent members of parliament on a platform of, in a British general election, Gaza, Palestine, an issue of zero concern to the British electorate. Suddenly we have sectarian ethnic politics in Britain. Never seen that before. Very, very concerning. Now, for all these people who I would call Islamic supremacists, Muslims who don't want to fit in, Muslims who want Britain and the West to fit into Islamic society, for these Islamic supremacists, white liberals are their useful idiots. For years, they have been fed the line about suffering Palestinians based on a complete set of falsehoods and distortions about Middle East and Jewish and Arab and Muslim history. They've been fed this line about suffering Palestinians in order to recruit them to Nazi-style genocidal Jew hatred, which is what infuses the Palestinian community, I'm afraid to say, going far beyond the Hamas. And this has been going into overdrive since the war in Gaza started. Now, this narrative of Palestinian victimization by Israel has been going on for years with no public pushback. It has been adopted. The Palestinian cause is the cause of causes for all Western liberals. You cannot speak against it. In fact, in Britain, there's no platform where you can speak against it. And in addition, liberals have subscribed overwhelmingly to the doctrine of Islamophobia, which is supposed to be it's supposed to be synonymous with prejudice against Muslims. It's not. Prejudice against Muslims is anti-Muslim prejudice. Islamophobia is a term of art that was invented by the Muslim Brotherhood to make prejudice into a pathology, so that if you were guilty of Islamophobia, there could not be a shred of truth in what you were saying about the Muslim world. And it's been used to suppress any reference whatsoever to Muslim aggression or any threatening aspects of the Islamic religion whatsoever. And this is now an article of faith also in the liberal world. Pro-Palestine, Israel is the oppressor, Israel is the colonial oppressor, and Islamophobia, you can't speak against the Muslim world or Islam. Now, some of these liberals are merely ignorant, stupid. Some of this ignorance and stupidity is the result of the collapse of education and higher education in Britain and the West over 4 decades at least, into the quicksands, the collapse of education, into the quicksands of social engineering and positive discrimination. You call it here DEI. That's a fairly late arrival to this doctrine, which has been going on for decades. It has produced students, school students, and university graduates who are no longer capable of independent thought. They have come from an education system which has told them over decades what to think rather than how to think. So this has been a general problem, to put it mildly, in the West for a long time. Nevertheless, the question remains, the question with which I started. Why has Israel become the most obsessive cause in the world? Why is there this tsunami of anti-Semitism? I mean, if you were a visitor from Mars, you would think, my goodness, everywhere you look, it's all about the Jews, it's all about what they're doing in Israel, it's all about how dreadful they are in the West, how dreadful they are here and there. It's all Jew, Jew, Jew. The Jews must be the most numerous people on the earth. How else could they be so much in everyone's minds? And of course, as we know, we are amongst the most tiny people on earth. So how is it possible that there is so much obsessive interest and concern and hostility and all the rest of it about Israel and the Jewish people? Now, there are obviously reasons that we can all talk about. We can talk about, how the left has been taken over by Marxism and post-colonialism and intersectionality, which casts the Jews as enemies of humanity, and all that is these are perfectly valid reasons for us to talk about. We can also note that October the 7th, the pogrom of October the 7th, got in the way of the narrative that is the narrative of the liberal world, the narrative of Palestinians oppressed by Israeli colonialism. Now, that narrative isn't just a view that they hold. It defines the liberals' moral personality as a person of conscience devoted to the cause of the oppressed. If that Palestinian narrative is destroyed, undermined, shown to be false, the liberal fears that his or her moral personality, his or her claim to be a moral being, will be destroyed. That cannot happen. And so, the Palestinian narrative has to be upheld. It cannot be negated or contradicted at all. And consequently, the Jew as victim has to be denied. Jews cannot be victims. If Jews are victims, and if Jews are victims of Palestinian Arabs, then their whole narrative goes smash, and their moral personality goes smash. So the Jew cannot be a victim, and that's one reason why those posters had to be literally torn down to protect that person's idea of him or herself as a moral being. One reason. But there's a deeper point still. October the 7th, the pogrom, was, I would suggest, an inflection point for the West in general. It was the point at which the question was asked, would the West choose to support civilization, or would it choose to support barbarism? And unfortunately, in siding with Israel's attackers, it has chosen barbarism. Even though it may not think it's chosen barbarism, that's exactly what it's chosen. Now, how on earth has the West, the acme of reason, intelligence, modernity, progress, conscience, how could it have done this? And I would suggest it's because the West no longer understands what civilization is. It no longer understands in particular that civilization is Western. The West invented it. Instead, in the West, our best and brightest have told all of us for decades that the West is terrible. It was born in the original sins of imperialism and racism and white privilege, and colonialism. It doesn't deserve to exist any longer. Western elites have set out to destroy the West. That's why the education system has been destroyed. Education is the transmission of a culture from one generation to the other. It's the way that the culture survives. It propagates itself to the next generation. But instead of cultural survival, the Western elites have told students that the West is born in racism and colonialism and original sin, and it has to be replaced by something completely different. These elites took a sledgehammer to the institutions that, apart from education, that safeguard the transmission of a culture, particularly the traditional family. They wanted to create a brave new world, crucially, a brave new world without biblical religion, which was constructed instead around the self. Everybody had the right to live as they wanted, to make their own reality. Nobody could say that their lifestyle was any worse or better than anyone else's. No one had the right to say their culture was better or worse than any other culture. The West no longer had the right to say it was better than any other culture. That was racism. And at the heart of all of this was the belief, or the doctrine, that there was no such thing as objective truth. Anybody who said there was objective reality, objective truth, was by definition an imbecile. It showed how unsophisticated they were. Anyone who was educated knew that there was no objective truth. Everything was relative. It was a matter of opinion. And because there was no truth, it meant that instead of facts, feelings became more important. What I feel trumps, if I can use that word, trumps what is actually true. It doesn't matter if that person has not actually attacked me. I feel attacked, and therefore I am attacked. It was that. And so, because there was no such thing as objective truth, and no facts that could trump feelings, no facts could ever overcome, no facts can ever overcome the images that people see of Palestinian suffering in Gaza. There are no facts that can challenge that, because what I see, what I feel, my emotion, my compassion, that's what matters. The suffering is what matters. What causes suffering, don't tell me about what causes the suffering. It's suffering. I emote. I'm a good person. Go away. It's like that. So the West abandoned the codes of morality, conscience, truth and lies, personal responsibility, duty to others, in favor of a culture of the self. And in junking all those virtues, it junked virtues that came from the Hebrew Bible, mediated through Christianity, which is at the basis of Western civilization. Not only did it junk these values, but it turned against the very idea of the nation state. The nation state, it said, is what has created prejudice and war. Hitler was a nationalist. He stood for a nation state. Therefore, abolish the nation state, you don't get Hitler anymore. It's literally as stupid as that. So instead of the nation state, you have to say, the laws passed by a nation state, well, they have a place, but they have to give way to universal laws and institutions which embody the brotherhood of man. Universal laws and institutions such as universal human rights law, the United Nations, international courts. This is, as I say, the brotherhood of man. It was John Lennon's Imagine. You know the lyrics of John Lennon's Imagine? They should be uppermost in all our minds. Imagine a world where there is no divisions, there is no religion, there is no prejudice, there is nothing to fight or die for. Nothing to fight or die for. That is the mantra of the modern liberal. And with nothing to fight or die for, the modern liberal refuses to accept the necessity ever of war. The idea that you go to war to achieve victory is anathema, because there is nothing to fight or die for. Everything is a matter for negotiation and compromise. And so between genocide and its victims, the liberal will split the difference. And that is why we have the Biden administration's strategy towards Israel. We can all talk about, sinister motives behind it, whatever. Okay, that's another argument. But I can hear something else that's going on, something deeper than that, which is the preoccupation, the obsession, the belief of the modern liberal that every single conflict in the world is amenable to reason and to self-interest, and therefore you have to negotiate and you have to compromise. And this is why we have a culture in the West of appeasement of Iran. Because Iran has to be negotiated with. Iran is rational, goes this argument. Iran can be brought in from the cold. If we actually allow Iran to join the club of nuclear nations, to be embraced by us, it will no longer have a reason to hate us. And so there will be peace, and the lion will lie down with the lamb, and everybody will just have to get on with everyone else in the Middle East. And so this is why America, amazingly, with its ironclad commitment to Israel, blames Israel for being the obstacle to peace by refusing to compromise to the point of surrender with the people who want to wipe it off the face of the earth. And similarly in the United Kingdom, the new government, the new Labour government, headed by Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, who will enforce now, ruthlessly enforce, intersectionality codes on gender and race and all the rest of it, and do the bidding of the Islamists to a greater or lesser extent. It's why that Starmer government has now turned quite viciously and suddenly against Israel. It's the same thing. It's the same concept. But here's the thing. The West, as I've said, tells itself that biblical religion is the source of all bad things. You get rid of biblical religion, then you can have peace on earth, brotherhood of man, you get rid of hatred, you get rid of the nation, you get rid of prejudice, fine. But the fact is that every single one of these values the West so prizes, such as conscience and compassion, reason, rationality, freedom from oppression, they all come from the Hebrew Bible. They were embedded in Christianity, but they come from the Hebrew Bible. They come from the Jews. Ancient Israel was the original paradigm nation state, believe it or not. Ancient Israel was the template for the ancient British crown. It's the monarchy and the coronation rights of the British crown are patterned on the Davidic pattern of ancient Israel, the Davidic monarchy. And that Davidic monarchy was also the pattern for the American Republic, which is shot through with references to the Hebrew inheritance that they claim. So I would suggest that it's not surprising that a civilization that's come to hate and despise itself and want to replace itself hates and despises the Jews, whose doctrines and precepts and beliefs lay at the very heart of Western civilization, and wants to replace the Jews and their doctrines. And so now we can begin to understand why so many tore those hostage posters down. They weren't just saying we can't bear the Jew as victim. They weren't just saying we can't bear the idea that Israel may have been the victim of anything. They were tearing the Jews out of their lives, out of their heads, out of their conscience, and out of their world. That's what they were doing. That's why their faces were convulsed with hatred and rage. So, you may think, well, I think I might go away now and shoot myself, having heard all this. I would suggest you don't do that. Is it all over for the West? Far from it. A revolt is now underway, as you may have noticed, in Britain, in Europe, and I would suggest also, tendentious, I know, to say this, in America. This revolt takes different forms, but wherever it is taking place, it involves the same basic thing. It involves millions of ordinary people who are no longer prepared to put up with an entire political establishment abandoning the core identity and values of the nation and their shared historic culture. And the result in Britain and in Europe has been the rise of what's called populist leaders and parties. So for the West, the fight for its survival as a civilization is very much on, and everything is to play for. Now, where does this leave the Jews of the diaspora? Look, there are bad times ahead. I think none of us needs telling that there are bad times ahead. Basically, when a civilization starts to disintegrate, the Jews get it in the neck from all sides. We know that from our history. This is going to be no exception. So what can and should diaspora Jews do? First of all, I would never tell anybody what to do, but I can simply report that some will decide to move to Israel. Some are already deciding to move to Israel. Many, if not most, cannot or will not make that decision. That's for them. But they need to do, those people, those Jews who stay in the diaspora, in my view, need to do two things. First of all, they need to stop echoing the destructive mantras of the left, which are mantras which are a dagger at the heart of Judaism and Israel and Western civilization. The social justice agenda, beloved of so many Jews in this country, is not tikkun olam. It is the antithesis of Jewish values. They must recognize that. Second, Jews in the diaspora must stand up for Israel much more robustly. They must start telling truths they've never told before. It's not enough to say, why are you all being so horrible to us, we're the victims. Once you start defending, you've lost. You're arguing on the grounds that the enemy has made for you. The Jews of the diaspora should go on to the offense and start telling the truth, telling truths about Palestinian rejectionism, about Muslim anti-Semitism, that the Palestine cause, which so many well-meaning diaspora Jews support, is based in its essence on the theft and cultural appropriation of the Jews' own history in the land of Israel. The Jews of the diaspora must start telling people, you don't like Zionism? You don't like Zionism because you think Israel is a colonialist enterprise? Let me tell you, Zionism is the Jewish liberation movement, the liberation movement of the Jewish people against colonialism. That's the kind of thing the Jewish diaspora should be saying. So, to conclude, as I've just said, this is an inflection point for Western civilization. It's also, I would suggest, the Jewish moment. The Jews, as I've tried to say, gave the West its core values. The reason the West has turned so emphatically against the Jews is basically because the West has turned against itself. Now, millions of ordinary people in the West either sense this or fully understand it. And this is the moment, I would suggest, when the Jewish people should make common cause with those millions of ordinary folk who want the West to survive and are desperate to find ways of doing so. This is the moment when the Jewish people can actually help the West to survive by showing that if it treats the Jewish people not as nuisances to be removed and we can't be bothered with them anymore, if it treats the Jews instead as the West's wise parent and as its most deeply felt ally, then the Jewish people can show the West how to survive. If you're intrigued by that rather gnomic remark, I should advertise the fact that I've written an entire book about this, which will be hopefully published towards the end of the year. I can't even give you a title because it's still being argued over, but it's about this. It's about the fact that this is the Jewish moment, and the Jewish people can now show the West how to survive. Judaism is, in essence, a culture of survival. We do survival. That's what we've always done. It's our unique selling point, survival. And it's why Israel will win this terrible war, whatever the cost, and however terrible what is to unfold will unfold. Israel will win it because we've been here many, many times before. The Jews are the eternal people because the Jews have survived every civilization that's tried to destroy us. Every single civilization that's tried to wipe us out has itself disintegrated and disappeared. We have survived. We will continue to survive. We will survive this war. Now we must help the West to survive as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
What did I tell you? You've just heard exactly what we all feel inside, but couldn't put into words as eloquently as Melanie Phillips. And the accent does help. I can't even begin to ask you questions because you've covered so much. And you've equated the struggle in Israel with the struggle for the West, which is why so many people say that Israel's war is the first front in our survival. And unfortunately, too many people or too many leaders don't get that well enough. There's something else going on as well, and we're seeing it, we've certainly seen it across Europe. We're seeing it desperately in Japan even. And that is, in order to keep our Western civilization and how we live safe, we need to propagate who we are. We need to not only teach the next generation, but we need to have that generation. And if our reproductive scheme is below what we call replacement level, we've got a big problem. Because there are many civilizations where they keep propagating themselves, including, thank God, Israel. Would you comment on this whole idea of the West committing suicide by not having children, not propagating themselves?
Yeah, well, it's very striking. I can't give you the precise figures, but I think virtually every Western country is not at replacement rate. I think America may be just about at replacement rate, but it's not very healthy, even so. But in general, the West is just not replacing itself, and it's literally dying out. And many people have thought about this and concluded, and come to precisely the wrong conclusions. They have decided that Well, this is the result of women's empowerment. That women used to produce children, and now they don't want to produce children because they're all working and they're all busily, buying 20 houses and 5 Lamborghinis. Fine. Okay, so it's all women's fault, and you can't really expect women to get back into the kitchen and the nursery, and that's it. It's not true, because you only have to look at Israel, the paradigm state of women's empowerment, where women work. And Israel's birth rate bucks the trend. It is something like just under 4 children per woman. Replacement rate is something like, I think, 2.1 child per woman. And so people say, oh, well, Israel, they've got all these crazy ultra-Orthodox all having, 95 children each. Okay, yeah, but here's the good news, if you take that position, that whereas the ultra-Orthodox female birth rate used to be 12 children per woman, now it is a mere 8 children per woman. So that's going that way. But okay, it's still 8. So is that the reason? The answer is no. It's not the reason, because it's the secular, not just the modern Orthodox, it's the secular Israelis who are also having 4 children. I heard a demographer speak about this a few years ago, and he went to North Tel Aviv, which is about the most secular place in Israel you can imagine, and they're all having 4 children. And he said, so why are you having 4 children? And they said, because we can, because we're rich. And he said, okay, I get it, you can because you're rich, but that doesn't explain, you had 3 beautiful children, why do you want 4 children? Because everyone's doing it. And we have to keep up with everyone. Okay, so you're rich, you can, and everyone's doing it, but even so, a 4th child, you just had 3 children. He drilled down, and he drilled down, and he drilled down. This is North Tel Aviv. They're totally secular. They can't stand anything to do with religion. They're all lefties. And they said, it's our duty to make the nation. Now, where else would you find that? So, to me, and to others who looked at this, it seems so obvious that the reason why Israel has such a healthy birth rate is basically because they have hope and expectation of the future. They want children to have that future. They believe in their nation as not only having a future, but entitled to have a future because they love their nation. They will fight and die for their nation, as we can see, and they want it to continue. The point about the West, it doesn't want to continue. It doesn't have any hope. It thinks, life ends with me. Nothing else matters. Everything finishes with me. It's all about me. There is nothing to hang on to. So in my view, to me, these things are all related. To get the birth rate up, you have to reinvigorate or revitalize love of and desire to continue the nation. You can, and the way you continue the nation is by having lots of children. So it's a kind of circular thing. But basically, the fundamental point is that you've got to believe in the future in order to produce it.
Thank you. Recently, there was an election in Great Britain.
There was.
And the results basically threw out the Conservative Party. I'd like you to just briefly go into why you think they lost these elections. What do you think the result will be? And how do things look in the future for the more liberal party running the UK, running Great Britain?
Well, at the last election last month, at the general election last month, Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party took power with an overwhelming overall majority in the House of Commons. So he's secure for 5 years. And the curiosity was that this wasn't because of a popular feeling of enthusiasm for Sir Keir Starmer or his Labour Party. On the contrary, people despise Keir Starmer and can't stand the Labour Party. The vote was as emphatic as it was because the people of Britain wanted to completely destroy the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party had been in power for, I think, 14 years, under, I think, 3 prime ministers. The Conservative Party, in recent years, in the eyes of the majority of the public who wanted them out, had betrayed every single promise it had ever given, had betrayed every single principle it ever stood for, had betrayed every single principle that could possibly be called conservative, and had reduced the country to an absolute ongoing disaster in which nothing works. I mean, the country is literally running in sewage. The rivers and the seas, which are Britain's glory, the rivers and the seas are so polluted. It's literally drowning in sewage. You couldn't imagine a greater and more effective symbol of what had happened. Public services have collapsed. Public administration is run by gibbering idiots who are the result of the education system. So the Conservative Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was unfortunately in the position of the child left holding the parcel in the party game. You know, a succession of disasters had happened to the Conservative Party, gone through one leader after another, one prime minister after another. Why? Because basically, this is my view, the Conservative Party had stopped being a Conservative Party. It no longer knew or understood what conservatism was or is, no longer understood what it had to conserve. It was all over the place. And this incoherence meant that it couldn't govern, it couldn't even explain to anybody what it was for at all. So the British public decided, not surprisingly, we can't have this. We simply cannot elect them again. They are unelectable. They don't just deserve to lose power, they deserve not to exist. And I agreed with that, personally. I understood that feeling. I understood where it came from. I agreed with the analysis. I agree they didn't deserve to win ever. I agree that they were a complete wreck. I agree with all the analysis. However, I thought to myself, from looking on from the tranquil vistas of Jerusalem, I thought, but if they throw out the Conservatives, they're going to get something infinitely worse. Because, okay, the country's drowning in sewage. That is truly terrible. That is really, really, truly terrible. Public services are a catastrophe. That is truly terrible. People can't get to see a doctor. They're dying on hospital trolleys. That is terrible, terrible, terrible. But my goodness me, if they elect the Labour Party, Britain's finished. Because the Labour Party will ruthlessly enforce all the codes of intersectionality. So freedom will die. Nobody will be able to speak about the undoubtedly growing issues to do with the Islamic, with British Muslims and Islamism and all the rest of it, because they will litigate, they will criminalise Islamophobia. And they will get absolutely everything wrong in terms of economics. They lie through their teeth. It will be a far worse disaster, because incompetent and stupid and incoherent as the Conservatives are, they didn't want to destroy Western civilization. The Labour Party does. It wants to destroy Britain as it is. It wants to destroy the West, that's the bit of Britain. It wants to destroy the nation. It wants to have the brotherhood of man imposed, because that's what they always were since the sainted Tony Blair. And now they can do it with this enormous majority. And so, I mean, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, or possibly that's the wrong analogy because this was two devils. But basically, you know, it was like Hobson's choice. Faced with a Conservative Party that was going to continue to flood the entire nation with sewage, better that than have a party or a government who's going to destroy the nation. And that's what they've now got. That's what they've now got. And they didn't even vote for it. They voted against the Conservatives. Keir Starmer's Labour Party, I think, got something like, I forget the precise figures, something like 30% of the vote. Of 30% of people who voted in the general election voted Labour. 70% didn't, right? But the British system is that, you know, you have two parties, it's a strong two-party system, one lot gets voted out, the other lot comes in, and it was an overwhelming majority, and the reason it was an overwhelming, the reason why it was such an overwhelming majority was the third element in this. I referred in my remarks to the rise of populist parties. Britain has a populist leader in the form of a man called Nigel Farage, who you may have heard of. He was the man who basically galvanised Britain to vote to come out of the European Union. He tapped into what he understood to be the popular feeling that Britain should be an independently governed nation again. And okay, so he's a man of great political consequence, but he, under the system, under the electoral system, he was unable to become a member of Parliament. On this occasion, he actually became a member of Parliament, and his party, the Reform Party, I think got 4 or 5 members of Parliament. But the point was this, that Nigel Farage set out to destroy the Conservative Party. And he did it for the reasons that I've said, that it didn't deserve to exist anymore. And he had a tremendous following, a tremendous popular following. He's very charismatic. And so what one found, what happened was that in constituency after constituency, which had previously been conservatively held by a Conservative member of Parliament, those people who had previously voted Conservative voted for Nigel Farage's Reform Party. But there weren't enough of them to win that seat. What they did was destroy the Conservative vote. So he basically deprived the Conservatives of dozens, if not more than dozens, of seats. So that was a kind of rogue element. That's what gave Keir Starmer, one of the reasons why Keir Starmer has such an overwhelming majority. So it's another way of saying, you know, the analysis was correct, but now they have, now Britain has a government which is going to be, in my view, is going to produce a very considerable amount of buyer's remorse, which I think has already set in.
I apologize, but this sounds vaguely familiar.
Perish the thought.
My goodness. Well, it's getting on where we should open the floor to questions, if that's all right with you. And please, I'm going to beg you to please keep it as a question. This gentleman had his hand up first.
I just would like some clarification from you. As I listened to your talk, you spoke at first about individuals who participate in this Hamas positive affirmation here in the United States as potential individuals who are ill-informed, or as Netanyahu called them, useful idiots, if you recall that comment. But later you discussed this individual who tore down the hostage posters as one who was somewhat informed in doing this because he wants to bring the end to this government that exists. And that's the part that's confusing to me, because a useful idiot isn't someone who has a thoughtful, thoughtful concept behind this destruction of posters. That was sounded a bit contradictory.
I certainly wasn't intending to suggest that when those people were tearing down the posters, they were thinking, yes, this is one to destroy the Jewish religion, this is one to destroy... It was incoherent rage. But they were indeed useful idiots. They're people who basically believe, Israel is the spawn of the devil.
Yes.
And they've been taught that by, an exceptionally effective onslaught, really, on the Western mind that's been carried out for decades. But they're useful idiots because the agenda is not, the agenda is set by the Islamic world, and the agenda is not for the liberation of the wretched Palestinians from Israeli oppression. The agenda is the defeat of the West, which we've heard in this war from the Hamas. First the Jews, then the Christians. That's why they're useful idiots. They think that they are fighting the good fight against Israel for the Palestinians. They think they're fighting for Palestine. They're not. That's what they think they're doing. They're actually being used as the weapon against the West by the Islamic world. That's how I would fit the two together.
It's very interesting looking at the map of Europe that Eastern Europe has become more conservative, possibly because they were under the yoke that they were for so long, whereas Western Europe, France, Spain, UK, seems to be going the way we've been discussing. Any brief thoughts on that, or?
It is ironic because places like Hungary, Poland. I mean, these are the Jewish graveyards, and they still contain many citizens who are deeply anti-Jew in a kind of theological Christian Catholic way, and yet they are the most sympathetic to Israel, and more than that, Hungary, I am told, is the safest place in Europe for Jews. So it's a very curious thing. But I think, as you say, the main reason why this has happened is because these Eastern European countries understand what it is to live under a tyranny.
Hearing you speak is really exciting, and last week you had somebody talking about the brain, and I would like to know how to get yours. That's not my question, however. I think you referred to Hamas as being Sunni and Iran being Shia. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Could you possibly explain the difference to me? And are they both united against Israel?
Yeah. Well, the short answer is no, I can't explain the difference because I'm not an Islamic theologian. It is in the finer details of very obscure Islamic theology. But basically, there are two tribes that make up the world of Islam. One is Sunni, and the other is Shia. The Sunni world is led by Saudi Arabia. It contains the Gulf states. And the Arabs of Palestine were part of that way of thinking. And the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the organization, the clandestine organization, which is Islamist in that they want to take over and conquer the West, is Sunni. Now, their great rivals are the Iranians, who are Shia, and they have a theological understanding which is, I can't begin to explain it to you because I don't know it, but it is a different interpretation of the religion in many obscure theological respects. Apropos that, there is a sect within Shia Islam, which is the sect to which the supreme leader of Iran and his predecessor subscribe, and others in the administration, in the regime, subscribe. And it's of great, great significance to all of us, because they're called the Twelvers.
What?
The Twelvers. They believe in the return to earth of what they call the Mahdi, who is the 12th Imam, and he is a kind of Muslim Jesus. He is the Messiah. And the Twelvers, of whom the supreme leader is one, believe that he will come to earth in the apocalypse, and they will bring about the apocalypse. So they believe that by destroying Israel and by causing a world war, they will bring the Shia Messiah to earth. Now, these two wings of Shia and Sunni are historic enemies in the way that when religions, divide within themselves, they kill each other in a much more savage way than anybody else kills them. That's the historic reality. You ask a very good question. How come Hamas, which is Sunni, is backed by Iran? And the answer is that basically, my enemy's enemy is my friend. And they combined in the joint enterprise of the Islamic world, bringing down the Jews, Israel, and the West. It's as simple as that. So there are these tensions, but they have been glossed over for the purpose of this terrible project.
I really appreciated the positive spin that you ended with. I want to give you a chance to offer a little more. I had a chance to ask a version of this question today to Michael Oren, former ambassador to the U.S. from Israel. In the United States, the latest Harvard-Harris poll shows that 80% of Americans support Israel. And even in some of the recent elections or primary elections, you see that the anti-Israel so-called squad, Cori Bush yesterday and Jamal Bowman in New York in June, lost. And you have stalwart leaders in the Democrat Party like Richie Torres and John Fetterman who lead the way. And then in Europe, right after October 7th in Germany, you had both the ruling leaders as well as the Alternative for Germany party coming out in support of Israel. And so I'm wondering if we were to do, and then you just pointed out in the UK that Labour really only got, and these are the people who are probably most vociferously anti-Israel, only got a third of the vote. That what percentage of that third is actually anti-Israel? So I'm wondering if you could comment on whether or not the world is as anti-Israel, anti-Semitic as it seems, or are they just the ones who inhabit these elite institutions that are the humanists, the people that you've described, have this false sense of politics and how the world should be run?
Yes, I have to say I'm not normally known to be a little ray of sunshine. But I do very much agree with what you're saying. Caveat, anti-Semitism has always been with us and is still, I think, very present in the West. I would say in large measure because of the inheritance of Christian anti-Semitism, which even in godless Britain, the culture is so infused with it that, and the better educated you are, the more you're exposed to that culture. If you read Chaucer and T.S. Eliot, you get it. If you don't read any of those things, you don't get it, which is why uneducated people in Britain are so much more civilized than the educated. But put that to one side. I think what you're saying, given that there is always going to be a significant amount of anti-Semitism in the West, I think what you're saying is absolutely correct. And I think that the problem is indeed a minority, but the minority run us. I mean, they run the world. They don't just run it in the sense of being the political parties in power. In Britain, the Labour Party, in America, the Biden administration. They run the whole apparatus, all the institutions of the culture, in particular education. And this is a really, really terrible problem. I mean, it sounds, you all laughed and it is funny, but the problem really is the people who go through the education system and are really exposed to it come out evil, and the people who don't have anything to do with it are really decent people. And those are the people who are rising up. Those are the people who rose up against the European Union, members of the European Union, and they were considered, knuckle-dragging troglodytes of no consequence. We don't even have to think about them. And of course, because they have no education, They're all racist. They're all motivated by racism. You had it here with Hillary Clinton, her famous deplorables. It is the deplorables that save the West. And it's the deplorables that will save the West, because there are an awful lot of them, and they are now in revolt. Now, I don't know how this revolt's going to transpire here. I have no idea. I'm sure you don't either, but we can all see, what's going on day by day. I don't even know what's going to happen in Europe. But as I said before, the fight is on. In terms of, are the majority of people decent enough to get it about Jews and Israel? Well, I think the answer is I don't know, but an awful lot do get it about Israel. In Britain, the classic response, I caricature, but only slightly, the classic response of the uneducated person when you say to him, what do you think about Israel then? And he'll say, well, I don't know anything about Israel, but basically it's people like us surrounded by raving lunatics. That's about it. That's good enough. And it's that, and there are an awful lot of people like that, and also people who do have education, who do understand that, in Britain it's very, very interesting. Britain has a tremendous problem with anti-Semitism. As I said, it's cultural, it's baked into the culture. But what was so interesting to me was when this terrible thing happened after October 7, this terrible thing happened in Britain, of these appalling mass demonstrations with clearly, demonstrably identifiable Muslims, some of them with green bandanas, with Palestine flags, shrieking in Arabic. And the British didn't know what it meant, but what it meant was, not from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. In Arabic, it's from the river to the river, Palestine will be Arab. Right? Nobody understood that. Global intifada, people said, well, in fact, it was described in my own paper, The Times, as, this seems to be a reference to civil disorder. Civil disorder. Okay, fine. So I was watching all this and thinking, oh my goodness, my goodness, my goodness. And then I was getting a lot of feedback from people saying, the scales have fallen from my eyes. Now I see what Israel is fighting. My goodness, we've got these people, the same people on our streets. We've got the Hamas on our streets. And I thought, wow, there's a whole section of the people who, until October the 6th, had no idea. And October the 7th, they started to get it. Now, there are a lot of, I don't know how many of them, I can't tell you proportions, I have no idea. But you're right, there are a lot of them, and the point that I was trying to make was they can be mobilized. They can be mobilized with the right strategy. Unfortunately, the Jewish world, bless it, has entirely the wrong strategy, but put that to one side. With the right strategy, with the right information, with the right approach, they can be mobilized. They're there, and the fight is on, because they understand that what's at stake is not just Israel, it's not just the Jews, it's us, it's all of us. They understand that. There are so many who do get it. So I am actually insanely optimistic.
One more question.
Thanks. As an English person, why are the Irish so incredibly anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic? And the second part of it is, if you're optimistic, what do you think about the Abraham Accords and Mohammed bin Salman and the direction of optimism in that direction?
Okay, you ask, I don't know why you have to ask such very specific and narrow questions. Can't you be a little broader? Okay, the Irish. What is to say about the Irish? Great people. Why are the Irish so anti-Jew? Before I answer that, let me illustrate let me give you a little anecdote which shows how bizarre this is. You understand, I'm sure, that Ireland is an island, and the top bit is called Northern Ireland and basically belongs to the United Kingdom. And you will be aware that for decades this has been fought over between Irish Republicans who want the whole of Ireland to be united as one Ireland, and who are basically Catholic, and the Protestants of Northern Ireland who regard themselves as British and must remain British. And that war has been going on for a very long time. It came to a kind of ceasefire, if I can use that term, with the Northern Ireland peace process, and that produced a kind of unstable peace, no more bombs going off for some years. Now, before that happened, before that happy situation happened, I went to Belfast to look around, and there were then, and I think possibly still the case, extraordinary phenomenon of a street, and on one side of the street, every house was Catholic. On the other side of the street, every house was Protestant. In Northern Ireland, the Catholics were the minority, but they're the majority in the whole of Ireland. But in Northern Ireland, they were the minority. Okay, fine. So you have one street. Half of it is Catholic, half of it is Protestant. And there was bunting, bunting little flags strung down both sides of the street. And on the Catholic side, the All Ireland side, the bunting was the colours of the Irish flag. I think it's green and orange. They're remarkable resemblance to the Palestine flag. Put that to one side. Green and orange. On the other side, the Unionist side, the Protestants who believed themselves to be British, the bunting was in the colours of the flag of Israel. Right? How weird is this? Of course it's weird, it's Irish. I didn't say that. Now, how to explain this? I cannot explain it because I don't understand the Irish psyche. But I do understand two things. Ireland is and was very, very strongly Catholic, and that had a great deal to do with anti-Jewish feeling as a cultural thing. The animus of the Catholic Church against the Jews was very intense. Ireland was a pretty primitive, theologically primitive society, and they basically bought into it. That was one thing. The second thing is that the people who want independence for Ireland, who are the Irish Republican Catholics, who are the people who run Ireland itself. Now, the people in Northern Ireland who are Irish Republican Catholics share an animus against Israel with the liberation movements, so-called, of Wales. Who knows about Wales? But anyway, believe me, they have a little resistance movement. They want independence for Wales. And Scotland, which is a much more serious independence movement. And these independence movements, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, are all viciously anti-Israel. Why? Because they all have the template of the colonial oppressor and the little people who are being oppressed. And so they identify with the Palestinians, because that's the narrative. And they don't just identify in the way that the English identify as a kind of worthy cause. They're living it. They're living being oppressed by the English. They know what colonialism is in their minds. So they identify viscerally with the Palestinians. That's part of it. Beyond that, I haven't got a clue. Abraham Accords, I mean, what's not to like? And it is the future, and it will be built on. Mohammed bin Salman, I don't know any more than you do. I read probably what you read, and what I've read over the years is that he understood a long time ago that if Saudi Arabia was not going to eventually have to return to being a people living primitively in tents, it had to stop being Islamist. I mean, like Saudi Arabia was where it started. Well, in fact, it started in Egypt, but anyway, Saudi Arabia was the main propagator of predatory Islamism. And yet, Mohammed bin Salman decided that Saudi Arabia had to become modern to survive. It had to embrace modernity to be economically survive. And to embrace modernity, it had to lose Islamism, which is essentially against modernity. Islamism tries to stop modernity and impose the 7th century. And to do that, he had to embrace Israel. He had to embrace Israel. So, and this has not altered. This has not altered. So, you know, the Abraham Accords has taken a back seat because of what's been going on in the last year or so. And people have noted their alarm that because in recent months, Mohammed bin Salman and Saudi Arabia have cozied up to Iran. And so people have said, well, the Abraham Accords then is over. That's not how it works, as I understand it. I'm not an expert, and I'm really, you know, I'm speaking just from lack of knowledge. But as far as I can make out, the Islamic world operates on the strong horse principle, that they're very pragmatic, and they will bury the hatchet with an enemy if they think that enemy is going to win power in such a way as to affect their lives. And so they have to make their peace with that enemy. And so that's what they are doing with Iran. Why are they doing it with Iran? Because they were confident that America and Israel would be the bulwark against Iran and would basically put Iran back in its box. And then the Biden administration came in and everything went pear-shaped, and suddenly Iran was out of its box, and the Biden administration was signaling, we're not going to support Israel. Israel is the problem. Iran is not the problem. Israel's the problem. And so Saudi said, we have to go with the strong horse. Iran is becoming the regional power. America isn't going to stop it. And we don't know whether America really has Israel's back. So we're going to keep on with Israel, but we're going to cozy up to Iran. But basically, the future is through the Sunni Arab states, the Gulf states, led by Saudi Arabia, making a proper peace with Israel, and going forward. Now, what's going on at the moment has interrupted that process, as far as we can see. But I don't believe it's been derailed. I believe that it's still on course, and that it is the future, and if that proceeds as it's hoped to proceed, then we will have peace in the Middle East.
In fact, some would say that this whole business started to disrupt the relationship that was growing between Saudi and Israel. Indeed.
So then what has started to disrupt it?
Sorry? No, they're trying to disrupt it.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
it is said that that's why it happened.
Exactly.
I read that too. I certainly think that that was part of it, but I also think that basically Iran and Hezbollah and all those people in Iran looked at the situation, looked at the fact that America was signaling great weakness. America was signaling, not just in the Middle East, but through the scuttling from Afghanistan and the appalling decision made in Yemen, which we can now see the terrible fruits of deciding that the Houthis are basically okay, and that Saudi Arabia had to be stopped. And so we can now see that the Biden administration basically empowered the Houthis, who are now busily trying to destroy American ships. Okay, so I think that Iran decided America was weak. It would not defend itself, and it probably wouldn't defend Israel. Israel was, as we all know, riven by a near civil war going on for the best part of a year over judicial reform. And Iran said, you know, this is it, this is our moment. So I don't think it was simply to disrupt the Abraham Accords, but I think that was certainly part of the goal.
I cannot thank this incredible person.